I tried a hardcore Nuzlocke of Pokemon Radical Red, a difficulty ROM hack that includes Pokemon all the way up to Generation 9, and some absolutely bonkers boss fights that get progressively more out of hand. In this Nuzlocke, I'll only be allowed to capture the first Pokemon I find per area, and of course, any Pokemon that faints has to be boxed forever. And if I should lose a single battle, I have to restart the entire game. A really awesome feature of Radical Red is you get to choose which region to get your starter from, giving you any starter that's ever existed. But with no knowledge of the game, I had no idea what would be good, so naturally, I went with my favorite. Is Piplup the optimal choice? Probably not, but he's just so cute. Doesn't look too happy. Now listen here, you ungrateful little Now that my perfect adventure had started with my bestest of friends, I needed to build a team, and preferably full of amazing Pokemon. But that's pretty far from what actually happened. My first encounter on Route 1 was a Bidoof, starting a pretty ridiculous trend. It didn't seem to matter where I went. Anywhere I turned, I picked up another normal type. In the grand scheme of things, this doesn't offer us any unique type advantage, and they really fall off towards the late game. Their saving grace is that some of them are actually extremely good in the early game. Disco the Furret evolves at the first level cap and has adaptability. This makes the first mandatory boss fight versus Faulkner in the Pewter Museum extremely easy. Adaptability Headbutt drops his birds like it's Thanksgiving. Before fighting Brock, I talk to this old man who gives me a Paldean egg that hatches into Sprigatito. But out of all the great options I have to take on Brock's rock types, Funk the Bee-Barrel is the star of the show. With Priority Aqua Jet, she doesn't have to worry about her low speed, and I don't have to worry about Geodude going boom. She even easily takes care of Onix and Varoom, only needing to switch out versus Arcan, which Pop swiftly sends back to the Jurassic with a Bubble Beam. You took me for granted? Really, Brock? Passing the first gym, I move on to Route 3, where I pick up a Fletchling. But the real business happens on Route 4, where this guy, who sort of looks like Tony Soprano wearing a diaper, sells me a Magikarp. All for the outrageous price of 500 Pokédollars that I just won gambling on a Pokemon battle versus the Shorts kid. This instantly gets us a Gyarados, possibly the best Nuzlocke Pokemon of all time, which is a pretty big upgrade to the hot garbage I currently call a team. And speaking of hot garbage, I next go for my encounter in Mount Moon. There are a lot of awesome encounters we can pick up here. Slugma is not one of them, but it's the one we're stuck with. And let me tell you, in Radical Red, you really don't want to be stuck with bad encounters. Because in this game, even regular trainers are like mini-bosses in their own right. And while my encounters had carried me this far, Nugget Bridge Rocket Grunt was my first real scare. I defeated every one of his Pokemon except his Togedemaru, which would prove to be incredibly tricky with Zippy Zap, a move that always lands a crit. And with my team all messed up from the fight, I knew there wasn't a clean way out, inevitably leading to the first death of the run. My very first taste of what Radical Red had to offer. At this point, Attempt 1 was all but over, when Americana holds with 5 HP, but importantly proccing Flame Body, without which I think the run would just simply be over. Burn is the only thing that actually limits critical damage, allowing Disco to once again be the hero of the run, taking Togedemaru out with a Headbutt Quick Attack combo. It ended up almost costing me Disco as well to the Rocky Helmet damage, so from this point on, I knew I had to be careful. Losing Herdier was tough, since at this point, Intimidate is kind of the only thing my team has going for it. Well, that and Illumise. Illumise? Does anyone give a fuck? Heading through Route 25, I finally find a good encounter. Or rather, it would be. Gut Swellow is incredible, and I'm pretty sure it can beat Pokemon Emerald all on its own. However, the fact that you get healed before every major boss fight in this game means you can't be pre-statused, making Guts a lot more niche. But even so, Swellow was a great help to dismantle Bugsy Deathless. Now I'm not just single, I'm a freaking loser too. I keep telling you, Bugsy, if you want a chance with Misty, you gotta ditch the bugs. Speaking of Misty, this is where the game starts to get really serious. Her lead is a Protean Frogadier, which is a pretty frail Pokemon, but with an Eviolite, it's incredibly difficult to one-shot. So as usual, I have to rely on Disco, which is the only Pokemon I have that can actually outspeed it and take it out in 2 hits. Starmie is next, and as with a lot of fights in this game, there's just no way for me to play around the crit. I have to just pray to Arceus that this Psyshock doesn't crit me so that Disco survives to fire off a U-turn. This does give me some decent super effective damage, but more importantly, importantly, the slow U-turn lets me swap in without taking any damage. And right here is the perfect opportunity to show you just how tuned the enemy AI is, often switching out if they know they have a hard counter to your current Pokemon. This means I gotta switch out, sending in K-Pop, who's actually a pretty decent utility Pokemon at this point in the game. With Charm, I can make sure Clodsire doesn't deal too much damage, and then Encore it the next turn into Bulldoze. Why the super smart AI switches from Rock Tomb to Bulldoze is beyond me, but it gives me a very free switch into Gyarados. However, Misty stays one step ahead of me by instantly swapping into Floatzel. Luckily for Blues, this thing runs Hidden Power Grass and not Hidden Power Electric, giving me a pretty safe opportunity to just lock myself into Thrash, since neither Starmie or Clodsire would want to take it on the switch. And if Floatzel wants to just stay in and take it, that's even better, getting rid of one of her biggest threats. As Starmie comes in, I'm confused, putting me in a pretty terrible position. Nothing wants to swap into this Psyshock, and there's nothing on my team that outspeeds Starmie. And because my next opponent is Surge, I figure I wouldn't get a lot of use out of Eurobeat, making it an unfortunate but necessary sacrifice. This doesn't get us out of danger though, since one Psyshock crit would let Emo join Eurobeat in the Fainted box. But Starmie is also in range of Seed Bomb, opting to go for Recover. What sucks for Misty is after she recovers, I take her right back into the red with another Seed Bomb. Realizing this is a losing battle, she fires off an Aurora Beam. Once again, we're completely dead to a crit, but trying to play around it would cause even more problems. Fortunately, I don't seem to be on Arceus's naughty list right at the moment, connecting with my Seed Bomb, which leaves only Clodsire. I can't one-hit KO, and I really don't want to take this Poison Jab, so I swap out into Blues to get an Intimidate, but unfortunately the Poison Jab manages to land a Poison. But I still need to get damage on this thing, so I fire off an Ice Fang, which pays off marvelously with a flinch. At this point, it's up to a damage roll whether or not Ice Fang gets the KO, so I swap out into Pop. It's really not worth risking Gyarados, especially when we have Pop at full HP, even though it sucks that we can't actually use any water moves because of Water Absorb. So it ends up taking a few extra turns with my strongest move, Pluck, which really isn't that good at all, before I'm able to finish off the fight, and despite losing one Pokemon, I think that went way better than I expected. Making my way towards Vermilion, I decide to do some fishing on Route 6, where I pick up a Shelder. I then hatch another egg into literal trash before getting my encounter in Diglett's cave. It's a Diglett. Pretty shocking. Before we can take on Surge, we have to visit the SS Anne, where the mini-boss fight versus these two sailors gave me a lot of trouble. It's a double battle where they run Mons with Surf to power up their Pokemon with Storm Drain. It's an absolute nightmare. The only saving grace was having Metal the Revavroom that could take out the Eviolite Laleep in one turn with Spin Out. Metal didn't actually make it through the fight, but without her, we wouldn't have been able to beat it. Once you reach Lieutenant Surge, you get the full taste of exactly how merciless this game can be. Most of the upcoming boss fights in this game center around a mechanic that boosts whatever type they're using, kind of how his lead Pincurchin sets up a terrain-boosted electric terrain before he swaps it out into Vikavolt. This gives Garbodor a chance to do what Garbodor is here to do, set up Toxic Spikes. And because Vikavolt is so extremely slow despite looking like a supersonic fighter jet, I managed to set up my second layer before being hit by Mudshot. From here, it's time to execute the main plan. At least the main plan to deal with Vikavolt, which is extremely desperate. The idea is very simple. We swap into Blues when it goes for Mudshot, baiting an electric type move, allowing us to swap into Glamrock to resist it completely. Stalling this thing out of power points is kind of my only hope against its legendary level special attack. PP stalling is not the most virtuous of Nuzlocke strategies, but in some cases, it's your only option. And in this fight in particular, switching between immunities is kind of my entire strategy, especially after setting up those Toxic Spikes. It's the entire reason I brought Gyarados against an Electric-type gym leader. This way, we can bait Electric-type moves into Glamrock and completely stall Bellibolt out of HP with Poison. Surge then sends out his ace, Mega Manectric. Because Glamrock is Ground Steel, we're baiting Flame Burst, which is perfect to swap into Blues. We're not completely immune like against Mudshot, but it doesn't deal very much damage. So once again, just like versus Bellibolt, I drain Manectric of all its HP with Poison by swapping between Blues and Glamrock. Once Manectric is defeated, Vikavolt comes back in, and without any Mudshot PP, I can safely go for Rock Slide, taking out more than half of its health. This way, a resisted Bug Buzz could never take Glamrock out even with a crit, and a second Rock Slide takes care of Vikavolt. Pincurchin comes back in to set up the electric terrain, and I swap into Gyarados on a Scald, which unfortunately gets the burn. What sucks even more is after poison damage, Glamrock isn't able to take Pincurchin out without a critical hit, so I'm forced to swap once again, this time into Disco. And blessed be the name Arceus that I don't actually get burned this this time. Disco goes for a dig, which after poison damage is just enough to take Pincurchin out. Which means last but not least, we have to deal with Pawmot. This thing is very fast and very strong with incredibly good coverage. Honestly, at this point, my best bet is to whittle this thing down with poison. So I start by swapping in Garbodor against a Mach Punch to start dealing that bit of poison damage. I then switch to Funk the Magcargo to tank a Thunder Punch for a little bit more poison. Now expecting another fighting move, I swap back to Garbodor, but Funk was in range of a Thunder Punch, so unfortunately Garbodor falls. I do at least manage to get some damage with Aftermath, getting us a little bit closer to the goal, after which I completely forget about Mach Punch, which costs me Glamrock. It looks like it's gonna go down to one more turn of poison, so I swap into Blues to get an Intimidate and to bait that Thunder Punch so I can go into Emo, who's at full health, to resist the Thunder Punch, and after poison damage, I had somehow collected my third gym badge in Radical Red. And with it, the new level cap of 44 means a lot of our Pokemon can reach their final forms, as well as there being a lot of routes where we can pick up new encounters, the most notable being Scyther on Route 16. Since getting a Bug Steel type just before the Grass Gym is incredibly helpful.
This gym is great, it's full of women.
Well, at least we know he's a grass man, you sick bastard. Eric is one of those gym leaders you never once had a hard time with, until you play Radical Red, where this hippie woke up and chose hate and war. She starts with Rillaboom, setting up grassy terrain with Grassy Surge to boost her grass-type moves by 50%. I lead with Americana because Rillaboom doesn't really have any great options. Because the most damage it can do is Drain Punch, which I resist, I decide to set up with a few Flame Charges. For one, this wastes a couple of turns of grassy terrain, which I desperately want off the field. But more importantly, she's most likely to send in Electrode next, which I really want to outspeed. Once Rillaboom is defeated, because of those Flame Charges, I can outspeed Electrode and go for U-turn. This little maneuver gets me some extra damage as I swap out into Emo, who only takes about a third by resisting the Thunderbolt. Electrode now only has one reliable way to KO Emo, so I swap into Blues to lower Electrode's attack with Intimidate before it goes boom. A crit here would of course have been absolutely devastating, but without a ghost type, there was really no way to dodge it. So Intimidate was my best bet to lower that non-crit damage. Erica then sends in Meowscarada, so I switch to Lo-Fi to quad resist the Flower Trick. From here, the most damage Meowscarada can do is go for Knockoff, turning it into a Dark type. But by just not holding an item, Lo-Fi barely takes any damage, and an X-Scissor takes Meowscarada down to its Focus Sash, allowing me to take it out the following turn with a Bullet Punch. Because Venusaur can't really touch Lo-Fi, she sends in Meganium next, and I'm really not looking to get instantly KO'd by Hidden Power Fire, so I swap out into Funk. Which is when things start to go really badly, you see, as Ancient Power grants Meganium the Omni Boost. This is incredibly bad, and something I definitely didn't come prepared for. All I can do is watch as Funk pathetically doesn't even do half with a Lava Plume, at least getting the burn. I'm not really in a position to switch here, so Meganium just takes out Funk with a Giga Drain, which gains back a lot of HP because of Triage. Even with the +1 speed boost, Swellow should be faster, so I try for a dual Wing Beat, but that defense boost is just too much to get through. Meganium launches another Ancient Power, which Swellow somehow survives with 11 HP remaining. But that doesn't matter, since Triage gives any move that drains HP +3 priority, taking out Swellow with a Giga Drain the following turn. I swap to Lo-Fi since it's unlikely to go for priority Draining Kiss or Giga Drain since it's resisted. This way I can take it out with a priority Bullet Punch, super effective because of its fairy typing, leaving Erica with only her ace, Mega Venusaur. The most damage this thing can do is with Earth Power, but it attempts to go for Sleep Powder instead, missing, which allows me to go for an Acrobatics. I try to finish the fight with a Bullet Punch, but Venusaur is just too bulky, this time connecting with its Sleep Powder. Now expecting it to go for Earth Power, I can safely swap into Americana and finish Venusaur off with an Acrobatics the following turn, actually granting me the 4th gym badge at the cost of a third of my team. With Erica defeated, there's a lot of Team Rocket ahead of us, so I make sure to get my Celadon encounter at the game corner. Here we can choose between a lot of really strong Pokemon that are super difficult to get otherwise. I end up picking Honedge since Aegislash tends to be an absolute menace. As for the Rockets, it's a very long gauntlet, and the first boss fight versus Giovanni is insane. A combination of Aegislash then swapping into Cloyster for a Hydro Pump Ice Shard combo does manage to take out Kangaskhan, but later in the fight, it ends up costing me dearly since I lose Cloyster to Veluza. The rest of the fight ends up going fairly smoothly, but this is just a taste of what Team Rocket has to offer. Before we can take on Sabrina, we have to beat both Pokemon Tower and Silphco. But before doing so, I head to Saffron City, where in this house, we're able to buy Dream Patches. This is a game changer since it gives our Pokemon their hidden abilities, which gives me an idea for a strategy using Pop's Competitive. I also make sure to beat Chuck before taking on the Rockets, which gives me a Tauros for my Saffron City encounter. I then grab a Haunter in Lavender Tower before getting the Pokeflute, which allows me to get one of the best guaranteed encounters in any Pokemon game, of course Snorlax. Because of Dupe's Claws and the fact that I already picked up Scyther on Route 16, I can't actually catch the other Snorlax, but there is some value in fighting it since I can use Thief with Emo to steal its leftovers. Finally, I'm ready to take on Silph. In the scary multi-battle, I make use of Incineroar's Intimidate to get a +2 to my special attack with competitive. This makes it incredibly easy to take out their leads, with Masquerain helping me deal with Gothitelle and +2 Scald taking out Incineroar. From there, it's a matter of swapping out into Aegislash, and using Protect to let Brendan's Sceptile do most of the work. Things do get a little too close for comfort once Brendan's Pokemon all fall, but we've got Priority Aqua Jet to win without any casualties. And before I take on Giovanni for the final fight in this Rocket Gauntlet, I pick up a Krabby. Silph Giovanni is the showdown versus the Ultimate Sand Team. It's more of a coincidence that it's also the showdown versus the Ultimate Short King. And while this battle ends up being costly due to sand being one of the best themes to build a team around, it ends up being Pokemon like Country the Tauros we lose, since I really had no choice but to sacrifice it in order to get off and Intimidate. At that point in the fight, it was the only way to get in Kingler for free, and without the Intimidate, the outspeeding Body Slam would have simply taken Mumble Wrap out. Whereas this way, I live to see another day and get to take out Kangaskhan with a Liquidation. I do end up losing Mumble Wrap the very next turn to Excadrill since there's nothing I can switch into. I could have guessed it would go for Earthquake and swap in Gyarados, but I'm pretty sure it saw a KO with Rock Slide too, and taking one look at my team, I'm in pretty dire straits. Besides, after Intimidate, Gyarados is able to tank precisely one non-crit Rock Slide, which is something I needed to rely on this turn in order to take out Excadrill with an Aqua Tail. Not the most smooth, beautiful, or reliable of victories, but hey, the run had made it past Giovanni, and that's all that mattered. This means we're up against Sabrina, who in this game seems to be a bit of a shiny hunter. This fight is also a double battle, making it twice as hard to plan for. But even so, going into this battle, I felt like a man with a plan. Here's the idea. Both of the opponents are most likely targeting Emo with a super effective Mystical Fire. But with Protean, I can change to a Ghost type as I take out Hatterene with a Shadow Claw. This means Indeedee's Mystical Fire isn't super effective, and we don't care about the special attack drop. Opera the Snorlax can then freely set up a Belly Drum to max its attack before getting some leftovers. There's a number of Pokemon Sabrina could send in here, but Ursaluna is perfect. Because it's Quick Feet and the AI is so careful to not get put to sleep or something, Ursaluna goes for Protect. This is to get burned by its Flame Orb, giving me a free opportunity to take out Indeedee with a knockoff. I end up going for Body Slam instead of Protect here, expecting Ursaluna to go for the Protect, to guarantee that Opera is able to protect the following turn. This is really important since Ursaluna sees kills on both Emo and Opera, but it can get a fast kill on Opera. Therefore, I go for Protect with Opera to make sure I don't actually get hit and knock off Porygon 2's Eviolite. Now, this wasn't part of the plan, but as an added bonus, Porygon 2 ends up setting up Trick Room. This is huge for me since Snorlax is incredibly slow and easily outspeeds Ursaluna in Trick Room, taking it out with +6 Body Slam. Porygon 2 hits Emo with Ice Beam, which does do a fair amount of damage because of Protean. However, since I'm Dark and not Grass from the previous turn, I managed to survive and U-turn out. I send in Lo-Fi as Sabrina sends in her Brute Bonnet. Snorlax has nothing to fear from the special attacking Porygon 2, so I just take out Brute Bonnet at the start of the turn with another Body Slam. His Aura is actually just slower than Porygon 2, so I knock it out with an Iron Head. Finally, we face Sabrina's Ace, but because we're still under Trick Room, Opera is fastest and can easily take Gardevoir out with another +6 Body Slam, granting us a swift victory to claim the 6th gym badge. Which is when I run into a massive issue. In order to enter Fuchsia Gym, we have to rematch the first 3 gym leaders. Having never played this game, I had no idea this is something we'd have to do. And with our current box of rejects, I knew disaster was imminent. These rematches versus the gym leaders is what really kicks off the late game. We're talking stacked, full teams of 6, including things like Paradox Pokemon. Brock's rocks were ruthless, and this time he didn't take me for granted. I knew it was a bad sign the moment I lost my Gyarados. And without a flying type to swap into Earth Power, I ended up losing Scizor too. Even Electropop fell, before our starter Pop was able to somehow salvage the fight with only 1 HP remaining against his Tyranitar. 3 of my best Pokemon fell versus Brock. But next I had to face Misty's Permanent Rain, where I just barely fell short of KOing her Mega Gyarados with Emo, ending up costing me possibly my best Pokemon. And just to rub it in, she claims Aegislash with a rain-boosted critical hit Snipe Shot. Snorlax, the absolute hero, managed to survive a critical hit Snipe Shot, somehow letting me grab a victory from Misty from the claws of defeat. But the extent of my whooping had only just begun. One by one, he started dismantling my team. First, it was Gengar, then he zapped Venusaur, and finally Snorlax found an opponent he couldn't stand up to, despite having Lightning Rod, even Seaking met her match. But worst of all was seeing one of my oldest and most reliable friends, Disco, succumb to the high voltage. As Rotom Volt switches against my final Pokemon, it takes itself out with Life Orb, and until this very moment, I had held on to hope. But staring into Manectric's intimidating eyes, I knew it was over. Pokemon Radical Red had bested me. I tried my best with what I had available to me, but in the end, I wiped to Lieutenant Surge. In a ROM hack as difficult as this, I'm surprised I got this far. I thought throughout my whole time playing that I'd lose earlier, at least in my first attempt. Of course I was going to try again. I was hooked on this game, and there's no way I'm giving up that easy. And this time, with a bit more game knowledge, I was going to make better decisions. For starters, literally, I decided to go with Sprigatito this time. Last time, I got it from a random Paldean egg and really liked how it played. So this time, I wanted it to be guaranteed. On Route 1, I once again encounter Bidoof, which pretty much guarantees the fight versus Brock. And instead of getting a grass encounter in Viridian City, I make sure to fish, which gets me a Marill. My other encounters are also quite decent. Starly on Route 22, giving me early Intimidate, but more importantly Route 2 Phanpy, which is excellent versus both Brock and Surge. My Paldean Egg and Pewter hatches into Charcadet, and after decimating Brock, I pick up a Nidoran male on Route 3. Route 4 has the guaranteed Gyarados, and once again I use the Repel trick in Mount Moon to try and get the 1% Riolu in Basement Level 1, but instead I pick up Paris, which is great for both Misty and Surge. As for the rest of my pre-Misty encounters, I hatch a Fire Tauros in Cerulean City, and I managed to fish up a Lotad just past the bridge. But most important is Route 25. By not getting an encounter in the grass, we can guarantee to get Chinchou, since you can only fish up Chinchou and Magikarp here, and we of course already got Magikarp on Route 4. And Volt Absorb Chinchou is kinda busted versus both Misty and Lieutenant Surge. Misty gets absolutely decimated by my new squad, and after once again picking up a guaranteed Shelter on Route 6, I hatch a Fuecoco from my Paldean Egg, and in Diglett's Cave, well, you guessed it, it's another Diglett. From here, we can guarantee another fishing encounter on Route 11 in Krabby, before it's time to take on my greatest nemesis once again. But just take one look at my team. The guy basically never stood a chance. But hey, let's not count our revenge chickens before they're hatched. As I make my way towards Rock Tunnel, I pass through Route 9, where my encounter is Indeedee, and this thing may actually be incredibly useful once we can get Dream Patches. I then get my encounters on Route 10 and in Rock Tunnel, before skipping encounters on Route 7 and 8 for a particular reason. And since reaching Celadon gives us access to Saffron, we can now change into hidden abilities. This time, my team is just as equipped to deal with Erica. The biggest difference being I don't have to deal with a stupid Omni Boost from Meganium. After once again picking up the Snorlax blocking our way, I run into Attempt 2's first real resistance, Silphco Giovanni. Facing his Torterra, my team had been pretty effectively whittled down, and switching in country doesn't actually lower Torterra's attack with Intimidate because of a white herb, but at least it gets rid of the item for Shell Smash. This also leads to Attempt 2's first death, and as I attempt to go for a KO with Ice Fang the turn after, Torterra survives, and Blues falls once again. And this is exactly how Attempt 1 started going downhill. Dubstep finishes off Torterra with an Ice Shard, which is Giovanni's final Pokemon, winning us the fight. But I can't continue playing this sloppy if I want Attempt 2 to go further than Attempt 1. With both Snorlax and Meowscarada available to me, I can use the exact same strategy to defeat Sabrina. Now that I can move towards Fuchsia, I pass through Route 14, where between the most likely encounter of Pelipper at 20% and the 10% chance to find a Torkoal, I've got a 30% chance to find a Weather Setter, which would be amazing for the gym rematches. And while Pelipper doesn't help me as much as Torkoal versus Misty, it's still an amazing pickup. A Dream Patch changes its ability to Drizzle, and with that, I'd made it back to the rematch versus Brock, Brock, but this time way better equipped. Sure, Brock can set up the sand again with Tyranitar, but we can get rid of the permanent sand with Boogie. And so the carnage began. Dubstep the Donphan went on an absolute tear, taking out both Arcanine and Tyranitar. Boogie came back in to set up the rain, taking out Ursaluna. Brock got close to taking out a couple of my Pokemon, but in the end, he didn't stand a chance. As for Misty, I just brought the most anti-water squad I could, and this battle felt even easier than versus Brock. Probably because I ended up losing Jolteon and Raichu in the process, sacrifices that made it a lot easier to defeat Kingdra, meaning in the end, Brock was a much cleaner victory. But since Jolteon and Raichu aren't very good against any of the upcoming matchups through the entire game, sacrificing them to beat Misty was definitely worth it. But all that means is I'd finally made it back. This time, all my Pokemon from the first fight are still alive. And this time, Indeedee is finally gonna get to be helpful by setting up Psychic Terrain to permanently get rid of the electric terrain. First, Iron Hands fell to Leech Seed, and then Rotom got whittled down by Poison. Iron Treads was bested by the original, and while I had to sacrifice Polka to get a free switch, he had served his purpose, allowing me to come in and outspeed with Dugtrio to take out Pawmot, then slowly whittle down Manectric with Leech Seed, then finally finish off Bellibolt with an Earthquake to get back where I was. And from here on out, I needed to continue to make better decisions. Starting with my Game Corner encounter. This time, instead of picking Honedge, I opt for Beldum, and the Poison Gym coming up is not the only reason. Though I will say, it was a pretty compelling argument, since Koga's Ninja team is pretty degenerate. Chief among his degenerate Pokemon is his Choice Spec Swellow with only Boom Burst and U-Turn. If I let this thing switch around and Boom Burst me when it pleases, it's gonna be incredibly annoying, so I make sure to take it out with a Thunder Punch immediately. This sends in Choice Scarf Drapion, which is pretty annoying. It's got the Sniper ability, so I'm pretty sure Wicked Blow always gets a critical hit. This deals a butt-ton of damage to Dubstep, in fact so much damage that after leftovers, a high roll could take Dubstep out. The second Wicked Blow ends up leaving Dubstep with 12 HP, and I fire back with an Earthquake, which is just barely not enough to take Drapion out. Luckily, I've got the contingency plan of Ice Shard outspeeding any Scarf and taking Drapion out. Excelgor is third, and I really don't have any great options here. Nothing wants to switch into an attack, so I opt to just go for Ice Shard to get a bit of damage before Dubstep sings its last song. Since Excelgor is a special attacker, I swap in Opera, and the Snail Ninja opts for U-Turn to swap out into Iron Valiant. This thing is the final boss of Pokemon Violet, so seeing it boost its speed and facing it versus the 6th gym is pretty scary. Very luckily, my Body Slam actually gets the paralysis, and I swap out into Death Metal to tank the close combat. Metagross just barely survives this in the red, but because of the defense drop from close combat, Bullet Punch is enough to take Iron Valiant out, sending in Toxtricity. This thing is about to Mega Evolve into a special attack stat of 155. That is absolutely obscene, so I swap into Yodel, who gets absolutely decimated by a Boom Burst. It does take a second hit to take Yodel out, but Quagsire's pretty bulky. From here, Snorlax is the only Pokemon that can tank a crit, so I send it into a Boom Burst to strike back with a quad-effective Earthquake, taking out Toxtricity from full health. Second to last is Koga's Battle Bond Greninja, so I can't let it get a KO, swapping into Emo. Greninja misses a Hydro Pump, and because Emo is faster, I actually expected him to switch out, which is why I go for U-Turn. The super effective hit deals a lot of damage, but because I'm jolly, I just barely miss out on the KO. Ferrothorn tanks the Ice Beam comfortably, and Life Orb ends up being the death of Greninja. Finally, there's only Excelgor left, but with Quagsire and Donphan dead, Metagross in the red, and only Meowscarada and Snorlax, there's actually nothing I can swap into this Focus Blast, and I determined that Ferrothorn is probably my least useful team member out of those four. It's really unfortunate to have to lose a third Pokemon in this fight, but this way we can bring in Death Metal for free and claim our 6th gym badge with one final Bullet Punch, because ninjas are certainly not bulletproof. But yeah, that was kind of devastating, and we definitely need some new encounters. So since our next opponent is Blaine, I go fishing in the Safari Zone where I find a Huntail, which is when I realize I'm gonna need a better plan. So I head back to Celadon, where the old man next to the tea lady lady actually gives you starter eggs for shards. Depending on the color shard you give him, you can guarantee the type of starter you get. Now, the location we hatch these eggs will be their Nuzlocke encounter location, which is why I made sure to skip some encounters like on Route 7 where I hatch a Piplup. And while I'm glad to see my favorite again, we're gonna need something better, so I opt to hatch another egg on Route 8, this time into Froakie. I also made sure to not get my encounter on Route 16 this time so that we can get another water starter, this time getting Mudkip, which is fantastic, because once we evolve it into Swampert and show this absolute degenerate that we seem to share his beliefs, he gives us a Swampertite, which is invaluable combined with Pelipper, especially since the gym battle versus Blaine normally takes place in permanent sun. He leads with a shiny Armarouge, and I send in Boogie in order to get rid of the strong sun. Another reason for leading with Boogie is it's a great way to deal with this Armarouge. With its fantastic special defense, Pelipper is guaranteed to survive any non-crit. I can then go for U-turn to break Armarouge Focus Sash, and if Blaine switches out, U-turn is perfect to switch me into whatever I need. Because of the slow U-turn, Swampert doesn't have to take any damage as I swap in, and once I Mega Evolve, I outspeed Armarouge because of Swift Swim in the rain. And a stab super effective rain boosted liquidation coming off of Mega Swampert's attack is definitely a one-hit KO. Next is Ogerpon, which house can't one-hit KO no matter what I do, so I go for a flip turn and swap into Folk. The Intimidate will lower Ogerpon's damage output, but with the resisted Horn Leech, it's already not going to do any damage at all. Staraptor is equipped with a Choice Scarf so that I can outspeed anything I need to and take out Ogerpon with this Brave Bird. Typhlosion comes in third, and expecting the Focus Blast, I swap out into Sableye, which I picked up in Lavender Tower. Because the rain just stopped and I really don't want to take a full power Eruption, I swap to Boogie to set up rain with Drizzle. After tanking the Eruption, I swap out into Honky Tonk and take a Hidden Power Grass on the switch. With Swift Swim, I'm much faster than Typhlosion, and a Hydro Pump melts it in the rain. Blaine sends in Slitherwing next, so expecting the first impression, I swap back into Folk, who gets off an Intimidate, once again just to reduce the damage of an attack that wouldn't be dealing any damage anyway, and this time I lock myself into Dual Wing Beat since it's guaranteed to take Slitherwing out anyway, and I don't have to take any recoil damage. Second to last is Executor, but this thing can't really touch Emo, especially not with a Psyshock on the switch, giving me a free quad-effective U-turn to switch me out for his final Pokemon. Beyond dealing with Ogerpon, this is what Folk came here to do. Blaine's final Pokemon is Charizard, but not just any Charizard, Mega Charizard Y, which sets up the sun as soon as he Mega Evolves. This is actually a speed tie, but with a Choice Scarf, I'm able to outspeed and fire off a powerful Brave Bird before Charizard gets to move. This plan does unfortunately sacrifice Staraptor, but it's just the tempo play I need to send back in Boogie and get rid of the sun by setting up my own rain. This also baits Air Slash, which can't ever take out House even with a critical hit. Then due to Swift Swim, we outspeed, taking out the rest of Charizard's health and granting us the victory. I then try to make my way to the Viridian Gym, but before I can enter, I'm stopped by Brendan, who takes me to Cerulean Cave. Apparently Team Rocket is giving it one last shot, and I've come to stop them yet again. But Giovanni literally captures Mewtwo right in front of my eyes, officially making this champion-level business. And Lance and I go up against Giovanni in a multi-battle, and this fight actually goes roughly to plan. Lance eliminates Tapu Lele with a Spirit Shackle, and Emo takes care of Scrafty with a quad-effective Play Rough even after Intimidate. Dragapult then deals massive damage to Mewtwo before it almost takes out both Emo and Dragapult. I seriously must be at like 1 HP, but I still managed to knock off Celesteela's Power Herb. I then protect as Dragapult knocks out Mewtwo, which triggers its Mega Evolution. I then swap into Pop to let these big boys fight it out. And while Mega Salamence managed to get Mega Mewtwo down into the red, it ultimately succumbs to the Expanding Force the very next turn. In comes Dialga as Pop unfortunately gets popped by an Aurasphere. But finally, we get rid of Mega Mewtwo with a Body Press. I send in my third Pokemon Metagross, and just sit by as I watch Dialga do the dirty work. The next turn, I do get hit by a Flamethrower from Celesteela, but because it's not Stab, at least I tank it, and Excadrill gets taken out by Dialga. Giovanni's final Pokemon is Tyranitar, Tyranitar. And I once again protect as Dialga melts Celesteela. This does mean that Tyranitar hits a high horsepower right into Dialga, taking it out, leaving just me with the T-Tar, but with Tough Claws boosting Iron Head by 30%, it's an easy one-hit knockout, defeating Giovanni once and for all. Not only does this mean we never have to see Team Rocket again, Lance also offers us a Salamence site, which could come in handy, but it also means we're finally allowed to take on the last Kanto gym leader, which has been replaced with Claire instead of being Blue or Giovanni. I lead with Shell Smash Cloyster, so Claire goes for Taunt to not allow me to set up, which is perfect since it means I won't have to deal with any Stealth Rocks. I can also take Aerodactyl out in one hit despite its Focus Sash with my multi-hit Icicle Spear. Claire then sends in Gouging Fire, but with a defense boost from Photosynthesis, not even 5 hits from Rock Blast can deal half. Claire gets pretty greedy, going for a second Dragon Dance, which allows me to hit it with a second Rock Blast, taking Gouging Fire into the red. Finally, Flare Blitz connects, but a neutral hit at +2 against Cloyster's massive defense isn't even enough to take it out, granting me the KO with an 11th hit of Rock Blast. Claire then sends in Magearna, so I swap to Death Metal to tank the Aura Sphere. An Earthquake then isn't enough to take Magearna out, but this thing basically only has resisted moves, so I'm not afraid of the Fleur Cannon. I finish off the Magearna with another Earthquake, so Claire sends in multi-scale Dragonite. The worst thing Dragonite could do to Boogie is dual Wing Beat, so I swap in to set up my Drizzle and unfortunately get hit by the Flying move. However, Boogie's been prepared for this exact situation, equipped with a Choice Scarf to outspeed and ruin Dragonite's multi-scale with a U-turn. I then swap in Swampert as Claire greedily goes for Dragon Dance. I hope she enjoyed that little number because after I Mega Evolve, Swift Swim will double House's speed and allow me to outspeed the Dragonite to take it out with a quad-effective Ice Punch. Fifth out is Roaring Moon, and I'm not gonna lie, this thing is a massive problem, especially with its attack boosted. I don't really want to swap in anything, so I go for a Power-Up Punch to boost my attack as Roaring Moon sets up with Dragon Dance, which is incredibly scary. I have to just stay in since nothing wants to eat this hit, and House actually survives, connecting with a +1 Ice Punch, which is more than enough to take out Roaring Moon. Finally, we're only left with Naganadel, and this thing is also a huge issue. So, in order to get a free switch, I swap out into Cloyster, which takes a Draco Meteor to the face. Since I was sacking Cloyster anyway, it's kind of awesome that it gets -2 to special attack in the process, but the +1 to speed sort of sucks. Because of the special attack drop, I can safely swap in Schlogger, who still takes a ton of damage from a Sludge Wave. And from there, a neutral choice-banded Playrough grants me the final Radical Red Gym Badge. From here, we've got a lot of scary stuff ahead of us before we can even think about the Elite Four. First of all, we've got a couple of rival fights. And while I'm able to decimate Hornlad through the power of friendship, but mostly the power of rain, the Brendan fight right before Victory Road goes a lot less smoothly. The guy has buffed up his team with a butt-ton of legendaries, and frankly, it's a taste of what's to come. His Landorus has Sludge Wave for some reason, which destroys Schlogger, and as I defeat his final Galarian Zapdos, I do so while completely forgetting that Greninja is holding a Life Orb, which means just before the Elite Four, I lose one of my strongest Pokemon. So I knew I needed some great new encounters, and luckily we've got a lot of roamers that were just unleashed upon the world. I make sure to fly back and forth to guarantee I can find Latias on Route 19. I then head to the power plant on Route 10, where I make sure to repel until I get all the way to Zapdos. This thing can't actually touch a ground type, but I had a bigger problem. This thing just didn't want to get in the ball. I specifically bought Ultra Balls for this purpose and ended up running out. I desperately resorted to just flinging Pokeballs, and eventually I managed to capture the thing. A lot of effort for a Pokemon I didn't even know if I wanted to bring to the Elite Four. At least now I had the option. I then went to get my encounter in Victory Road, where I find a Salamence. This is a pretty nice encounter and possibly changes what I want to bring. But before we can even think about what we want to bring to the Elite Four, we have to take on the game's creator, Supercell. This dude has a team full of level 250 Pokemon. So if this fight catches you off guard, you probably just lose the run on the spot. The gimmick here is that each of his Pokemon only have one move, starting with his Gigalith that's really just here to set up Sandstorm and then go boom. He then has 5 Shedinjas, but these all only have one move, Supercell Slam, an electric type move, which means as long as we have a ground type, we can just wall every single one of them and get an easy victory. You're certainly ready. The creator of the hack may think so, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. I knew preparing for the Elite Four would be tough. With 2 possible teams for every Elite Four member, I needed to be prepared for anything. I just for the life of me couldn't come up with a solid solid plan, and at this point, I'd been playing this game for almost 70 hours over the past week, and it was starting to take over my life.
Look, I'm sorry to bring this up in a moment like this, son, but your mother and I have decided to get divorced.
Snorlax seems like a no-brainer, stops a lot of special attackers and ghost types, and for the physical side, I can use Salamence's Intimidate, and maybe something like Zapdos or even Metagross works. But to deal with Lorelai's weather, there's just something missing.
I think I got it! Where are you going?
Well, Dad, I'm sorry it's not to get a job application, but it might be better. I'm going back to Celadon to pick up starter eggs since there are still a few locations we could get encounters. I then head to Route 18 where my egg hatches into Charmander. And this little dude might just be the answer to my problem. I name him in honor of our greatest team member, Disco, and with a Charizardite Y from Blaine, I figured I might have a chance against either of Lorelai's teams. Death Metal is here to offer some physical bulk with its excellent typing, and even more excellent damage with Tough Claws. Our starter Emo is here to hopefully confuse the AI with Protean and to have somewhat of an answer to some of Lance's dragon types. The later down the line we get, the harder it is to be prepared for it. As I mentioned, Snorlax is a no-brainer, offering great special defense and a normal type for immunity against Agatha's ghosts. And to supplement that special defense, we've got Jazz. We'll be facing a lot of special attackers, and being a dragon type, she might help out against Lance. Finally, there's Salamence, who I forgot to record a team preview clip for, but she's here to intimidate physical attackers and hopefully get the best of Bruno. Even with somewhat of a plan in place, it felt like stepping into the dark as soon as I entered the Elite Four. I knew this would be my toughest challenge yet, but at this point, all I could do was send it. Lorelai either has a rain team or a hail team that's pretty bad for us since our team is very weak to ice. On the other hand, the fact that we face the hail team is actually pretty good using Charizard Y. Ninetales is fastest on the field, and if it gets to set up Aurora Veil, it's borderline over. Metagross does have Thunder Punch as a way to potentially deal with the water team, but it definitely matches up a lot better against the ice. But here's the plan. Because Disco sets up the sun after Mega Evolving, Ninetales still thinks it can Aurora Veil at the start of the turn, effectively wasting its turn. And without Slush Rush, Disco is faster than Glaceon, allowing us to just take it out despite its huge special defense. There's no real point having Death Metal take Ninetales out with a quad-effective Steel move, so I just set up with Power Up Punch to boost my attack. Because both my Pokemon are slower than Ninetales, I'm forced to go for a Bullet Punch, which is quad-effective, so I easily take it out before it gets to take a turn. Disco then launches a Solar Beam at the Washing Machine, which is more than enough to take it out in one hit, meaning we've pretty effectively dealt with half of Lorelai's team before she sends out Baxcalibur and Abomasnow. This does throw a bit of a wrench into my plan since Abomasnow sets up Hail, getting rid of my sun, and to make matters worse, as it Mega Evolves, it gets Slush Rush, making it faster than both of my Mons. However, the worst thing it can do to me is Hidden Power Fire, which I'm really not too afraid of since it can't take out Metagross with a crit. I try going for the KO against Baxcalibur with Draco Meteor, but it ends up protecting, so all I can do is Meteor Mash the Abomasnow to take it out with Death Metal. This puts us in a pretty good spot against her final Pokemon Calyrex, which is incredibly slow at only 50 base speed. I go for Protect with Disco, hoping to bait the Glaive Rush, but it ends up going into Metagross. This didn't make sense to me at all, since there literally isn't a crit range that could take me out, but it gives me a free opportunity to outspeed Calyrex and take it out with a +1 Meteor Mash. I then go for a Bullet Punch to soften up Baxcalibur for a Draco Meteor, but it ends up just taking it out, getting us our first Elite Four victory. Our next opponent is Bruno, and thank goodness there aren't any more double battles. Bruno leads with either Great Tusk or Infernape, and in this case, it doesn't really matter which we face. The best move this Great Tusk has against Hardrock is a resisted close combat, and after an Intimidate, there's really no reason to be scared with Mega Salamence's massive 120 base defense. So I take the first turn to set up my attack and speed with Dragon Dance as Great Tusk lays out the Stealth Rocks. If we would have faced the Infernape team, we would have still outsped the Infernape with Mega Salamence to get in one Dragon Dance. However, because of Taunt, there wouldn't be a way to continue setting up on it. On the plus side, I could have just taken it out the turn after Taunt and not had to deal with Stealth Rock, which would have led to a pretty easy workaround. The Infernape would have been holding a Focus Sash just like Great Tusk, which is why I equipped Hardrock with dual Wing Beat to be able to take it out in one hit anyway. Second out is Urshifu, which is decently bulky, but with our boosts, it's no problem, and we take it out with a second dual Wing Beat. Third is Iron Valiant, but it doesn't even outspeed base Mega Salamence, it gets dropped by a single hit. Fourth, I face Iron Hands, which which actually gets to do something with a priority fake out. Anything to make Bruno feel like he's actually contributing to the fight, because Iron Hands instantly gets dropped to an Earthquake right afterwards. Zacian comes out 5th, and is probably one of the strongest mistakes Game Freak has ever made. Unfortunately for Bruno, the same statement could be applied to Mega Salamence, especially after 3 Dragon Dances. This just leaves Bruno with his own Mega Evolution, which also gets completely clapped by an Earthquake. Both Bruno and Lorelei went so incredibly smooth because I had the most preparation. So despite my amazing success, I was shaking in my boots going into the fight versus Agatha. She leads with a Gengar, which is a very deceptive move since this is either a Hisuian Zoroark or the regular old kind. They both have Taunt, but regardless which one I face, I can outspeed with Hard Rock and set up with 1 Dragon Dance. Gengar then taunts me, so I have to attack next turn, but with +1, do a Wing Beat is a guaranteed KO, regardless which one of the Focus Sash Zoroarks we end up facing. Because we took down regular Zoroark, I know this Goldango doesn't have Thunder Wave, and annoyingly, it does have an Air Balloon, which means my Crunch just barely falls short of a KO where Earthquake would have taken it out. The worst it can do is make it rain, which can never KO even with a critical hit, so I'm safe to take Goldango out the next turn. After Taunt wears off, I face one of the biggest issues on our team, Xian Pao. This Dark and Ice type is very strong and very fast, and sees a KO against my Dragon Flying type with priority Ice Shard, so I swap out into Disco. Disco is Choice Scarf for this exact occasion, and I'm surprised Agatha didn't switch out since I had the KO with Flamethrower. Next, she sends in Flutter Mane, which gets its speed boosted by Photosynthesis, so I swap out into Opera, who can dodge the Shadow Ball. Since I know it won't ever go for a Shadow Ball into my normal type, I can safely swap in Death Metal here, but she ends up swapping out of Flutter Mane into Marshadow. This thing is one of the biggest problems for my team to deal with, but I had a bit of a plan. Not a great one, but a plan. Marshadow only has 1 fighting move in close combat, and at maximum PP, it only has 8, so I need to bait it into using every single one of them. The only issue with the plan is I don't have a Ghost type to be immune to fighting, so every time I switch out, I'm still taking a pretty big risk since Jazz takes a ton of damage from the close combat. But by using Protect every time I switch into Opera, I can waste a lot more PP, not having to take too many hits. Once Marshadow's out of close combats, its only attacking moves are Ghost, meaning Opera is perfectly safe to just fire off Crunches until it goes down, and is then perfectly poised to take on Mega Gengar. Unfortunately, whether I go for Earthquake or Crunch, it doesn't actually take out Gengar in 1 hit. This makes it a little bit scary that Gengar doubles its special attack with a Nasty Plot before firing off Aura Sphere, but I don't get punished with a crit and take Gengar out. Water Main comes back in, which once again won't ever go for Shadow Ball, so I can switch to Death Metal and take it out with a single Bullet Punch. And with that, we've reached the point where my planning was really limited. Most of my brain cells were expended trying to get me past Agatha, but Lance is a different beast from the previous 3. With a near unkillable Primal Dialga, I made a plan to take out his lead, and while I had an idea of a plan from there, losing to Lance was something I'd pretty much resigned to. Whether he leads Aerodactyl or Garchomp, I knew I could take out either of them with a triple Axle. We do take a bit of rough skin damage against Garchomp, but we would have been outsped and faced rocks against Aerodactyl, so I'll definitely take it. Second, he sends out Iron Jugulis, which is a big problem with its special attack boost, and while Stab Play Rough isn't enough to take it out, because of Protean, we're not an Ice type anymore, and I just barely can hold on to dear life since Flamethrower isn't super effective anymore. Once Iron Jugulis goes down, we face the Primal Dialga. This thing's defensive stats make it nearly unkillable, but with Rest and Sleep Talk, things are even worse. That leaves it with 2 stab attacking moves, the first one being Flash Cannon, which Death Metal can easily tank. The second one is Roar of Time, which in this game is negative priority, which is why I get to use Earthquake first here. But what makes Primal Dialga almost impossible to beat and almost impossible to plan for is that it also switches you out. The fact that I'm switched into Opera is kind of okay since his massive special defense allows me to fire off another Earthquake, which doesn't even get Dialga into the yellow. Opera being swapped into Emo, on the other hand, is absolutely terrible, so I go back into Death Metal, and the reason I'm doing so little damage is because Dialga has an ability akin to Filter that turns any super effective hit into neutral damage. Finally, with a third Earthquake from Mega Metagross, I get Primal Dialga into the yellow before being Roar of Timed out once again. And here, something very interesting happens. For some reason, Lance decides to switch out. He could have very easily tanked the next Earthquake, but my best guess is that the AI didn't account for Dialga's ability. It saw that Snorlax had the KO with Earthquake if you don't factor in the ability, and Lance decided to switch out. And the amount that affects my chances of defeating Lance is huge, especially since he swaps into Meanwhile, Metal as I send in Disco, setting me up perfectly for the KO with a sun-boosted Flamethrower. He then sends in Dragonite, by far the most manageable of his 3 remaining Pokemon, so I stay in and go for Will-O-Wisp to lower its attack. Unfortunately, this Dragonite has a Lumberry, getting rid of the burn, and then goes for Dragon Dance to boost its attack and speed. This is not ideal, since after the second Dragon Dance, Dragonite has effectively doubled its speed before I have it. However, there's another reason it's very worthwhile burning Dragonite, since it gets rid of Multiscale. And at neutral attack, I'm really not that afraid of a dual Wing Beat, so I launch a Draco Meteor, which sadly doesn't quite get the KO. But because of the burn, that doesn't actually matter, since Dragonite goes down to its status at the end of the turn. But this just means we have bigger problems. Outside of Primal Dialga, we've got to face Mega Salamence, and his is a lot shinier and fancier than mine. Even so, swapping into Hard Rock to get an Intimidate is my only line here. Nothing good can come of this. If Salamence hits me with an attacking move, that's really bad, and if it goes for Dragon Dance, which it does, that's possibly even worse. Regardless, I have to just stay in an attack here, but Salamence goes for a second Dragon Dance. I try for a super effective Dragon Claw, but even with a critical hit, Hard Rock can't penetrate Mega Salamence's awesome defense. And so, I'm really left with no choice but to sacrifice Jazz. With Metagross at such low HP, it was my only option. At their current HP, everything on my team would have been one-shot by that Double Edge. But there is one silver lining to my Pokemon going down at the same time, since it means I get a free switch into Primal Dialga. And because it's still in the yellow from when Lance switched out, Disco can fire off a sun-boosted Overheat, which is just enough to take it out, granting us victory versus Lance. Just defeating Lance was unexpected, but now I had to go up against the champion, and with only 5 of my Pokemon remaining. Hornlad has assembled a team of some of the most disgusting legendaries ever created, and here I was, not even expecting to get past Lance, with no real plan. Somehow, Attempt 2 had made it all the way to the champion, and whether I should win or lose, I was proud just to have gotten this far. In order to outspeed his Pheromosa, Emo is Choice Scarf, and his entire job was to knock off Pheromosa's Focus Sash, but Hornlad decides to swap into Metagross. This is both good and bad, since we deal super effective damage, taking Metagross below half, but because it's holding a Mega Stone, we don't actually get rid of its item. Mega Metagross is a bit bulkier than its normal form, so my second knockoff doesn't quite take it out. But somehow, Emo actually survives a Meteor Mash, so I swap out into Death Metal. And this time, I'm the one with the shinier version. Priority Bullet Punch is the reason I swapped Emo out, despite being so much faster than Mega Metagross, and ironically, it ends up being the way I defeat it. Hornlad then sends out Miraidon, another disastrously powerful box legendary for me to try to defeat. And with Electric Terrain boosting up its electric moves by 50%, I'm in deep trouble. I swap into Opera as it sets up with a Calm Mind, and because it doesn't see a KO at +1, it's set up once again, allowing me to go for an Earthquake. Snorlax unfortunately isn't the strongest attacker in the world, so it doesn't even take Miraidon below half, and the next turn, it sets up again with a third Calm Mind. I pray for a crit, but my second Earthquake just doesn't quite do it, and while Miraidon can't one-shot Opera with a Parabolic Charge, it gets enough HP back that a third Earthquake doesn't do the job. There's nothing I can swap into an Electric Terrain boosted Parabolic Charge from a +3 Miraidon, so I have to let Opera go. And the only way I'm gonna defeat this thing is attacking on the physical side. Emo can outspeed with the Choice Scarf, and thank Arceus above that a stab Play Rough is enough to take Miraidon out. Interestingly, we next face Imposter Ditto, and because I'm at such low HP, I'm hoping it'll go for Sucker Punch. So I swap out into Hard Rock to get an Intimidate, and seeing that Sucker Punch made me very happy. Hornlad's Ditto is Choice Scarf, so it's now locked into Sucker Punch. Sucker Punch only deals damage if you use an attacking move, so we can get around taking damage at all by setting up Dragon Dances, which also boosts our attack and speed for free. Hornlad isn't gonna just watch me set up to +6 and stall him out, so he swaps out into a Veltal as I set up my second Dragon Dance. I can't let a Veltal attack me, so I go for my strongest move, Aerialate Double Edge. And at +2 attack, that's an insta-kill against a Veltal. Now I'm just hoping he doesn't send back in Ditto, but he decides to send out Pheromosa again instead. I desperately need to get rid of this thing's Focus Sash, so I just attack to get it down to 1 HP. It's a lot of boosts to sacrifice, but in the end, I think letting Hard Rock go here was the right choice. It does have the consequence of giving Pheromosa a speed boost with Beast Boost, but where we're going, we don't need speed. Since Death Metal has the priority Bullet Punch, we can outspeed and chip off its final HP. With only 3 Pokemon remaining, we face Eternatus. This thing is mega busted, and I didn't think I would survive a single flamethrower, so I go for Bullet Punch. But somehow, Death Metal survives in the red, giving me a second Bullet Punch to take Eternatus below half. Hornlad then takes out Death Metal, evening the scales and making this a 2-on-2. I send out Emo, just praying that Triple Axle will be enough to take Eternatus out. The first hit doesn't deal too much damage, but the second one takes us all the way, meaning we're down to Hornlad's final Pokemon, which I just remembered is Ditto. And because of Choice Scarf, he's got to lock himself into a single move. And as Hornlad locks himself into Sucker Punch, I realize that my final Pokemon is the perfect counter. Not only does Disco beat Meowscarada with both fire and flying, but I could theoretically spam Will-O-Wisp until Ditto runs out of Sucker Punches and struggles to death. But once Ditto was burned, I wanted this run to end in a more dignified way. And so, with one final overheat, I'd actually done it. I'd beat a Pokemon Radical Red Hardcore Nuzlocke, and with only 1 Pokemon remaining. To be honest, I was very surprised. I thought I'd just lose to Lance and post the video like that, but I made it. And sure, it wasn't on my first attempt. It wasn't even on the fabled Hardcore mode. But hey, it was my first time playing the game, and I really had fun with it. But hey, I'm really excited to tackle Hardcore mode on stream, and if that's something you'd want to see, leave a comment down below, and while you're down there, you might as well subscribe so you don't miss that video.
The thing is, your mother and I, we've decided to get divorced. And
Okay, Pokemon. Hold on. Pokemon.
well, the thing is, Axel,
I can't look at you.
part of the trouble is that Axel is your real name, and I actually am your father. The thing is, son,